My nephew's drowning wasn't so accidental, and who pushed him, my sister knew exactly. Danny's tiny Superman t-shirts were what I was folding, the ones he would insist on wearing every single day, despite having outgrown them months ago, when Sarah called. Hollow and strange her voice sounded, like with a rusty spoon someone had scooped out her insides and left only an echo to bounce around in an empty cave. "Danny's in the hospital," she said, and each word fell like a stone into dark water. At the lake he nearly drowned. Through the floor my stomach dropped, past the basement, and straight into the earth's molten core. Only 8 years old was Danny, but he had been swimming since before he could walk properly. Part fish, that kid was practically spending whole summers underwater at my pool, holding his breath for 2 minutes straight as I timed him on my phone and worried over brain damage from oxygen deprivation. From swim meets, he had a wall full of blue ribbons that covered every inch of space above his bed, and he could execute butterfly strokes much better than most high school varsity swimmers. The idea that he could drown was like saying a bird had forgotten suddenly how to fly. "What happened exactly?" I asked, already having dropped the laundry basket and grabbed my keys and purse from the kitchen counter. "He just went under. Unconscious, the lifeguards pulled him out. To regional medical, they airlifted him. The doctors have no idea if he's going to wake up, Lisa. Brain damage, they're saying there might be." The 43-minute drive to regional medical center I made in 28. White against the steering wheel were my knuckles, and I ran through every possible scenario in my head like a broken record. Heat stroke, a sudden muscle cramp, some kind of seizure, an allergic reaction to something in the water. But logical sense was made by none of it. Healthy as a horse was Danny, as strong as an ox, and in water more comfortable than on dry land. Swimming, he lived and breathed. In the pediatric ICU waiting room, Sarah stood, still in her wet red bikini, covered by a thin hospital gown someone must have draped over her shoulders. Down her cheeks, mascara was streaked like black tears, and in damp, tangled ropes her blonde hair hung around her face. But with the entire picture she presented to the world, something was fundamentally wrong. In all of our 32 years as sisters, having grown up in the same house, sharing the very same bedroom until we were teenagers, this composed I had never seen her during any kind of crisis. When Max, our childhood golden retriever, died of cancer, for 2 solid weeks she sobbed. Anything except saltine crackers she couldn't eat. More than an hour at a time she couldn't sleep without screaming as she woke up. When in high school, she broke her wrist falling off her bike, so badly she hyperventilated in the emergency room that on oxygen they had to put her and sedate her with Valium just so they could get x-rays. Now her only child, the very center of her entire universe, the kid for whom she'd fought tooth and nail in a bitter custody battle, was fighting for his life, in a medically induced coma with machines doing his breathing for him, and she looked guilty. Terrified, yes, but not in the way a mother should be when her child is terrified of dying. This was the kind of terror that comes from knowing a thing you're not supposed to know, from carrying a secret that everything could destroy. "Where's Marcus?" I asked, referring to her boyfriend of 6 months and 12 days, precisely. The precise timeline I knew because I'd been counting the days down, waiting for this relationship to implode just as spectacularly as all her others. "He had to leave for work. Emergency shift," she said, not meeting my eyes, staring at the motivational posters on the waiting room walls instead. At the last minute, someone called in sick. As immediately and deeply suspicious, that struck me. Marcus managed a Pizza Hut on the outskirts of Millfield, our small town, population 8,200, as stated on the welcome sign. What kind of pizza emergency could not wait when in a hospital bed your girlfriend's child was drowning, with tubes down his throat and machines keeping him alive? "Sarah, I need you to tell me what happened exactly out there at the lake. Every single detail." At the polished linoleum floor she stared, picking at her cuticles until they began to bleed, a nervous habit she had developed after the messy divorce of our parents when we were 12 and 10 years old, respectively. "I already told you everything. He went under the water and up, he didn't come back. Kids do that sometimes, right? Freak accidents, even really good swimmers can have. But better than anyone in the world except Sarah herself, I knew Danny. Around most adults, that kid could swim circles without breaking a sweat or showing any fatigue signs. On the Millfield Regional Swim Team he had been since he was 6 years old and in all 4 competitive strokes. He had absolutely perfect form. In the past 2 years alone, he'd won 17 blue ribbons, and his bedroom walls were covered with trophies and certificates. The idea of him just going under randomly in a supervised public lake was utterly and completely absurd. "Were you watching him the entire time he was in the water?" "Of course, I was watching him." Her voice snapped with defensive irritation, the way it always did whenever she felt cornered. "Jesus Christ, Lisa. What kind of mother do you even think I am? Do you think I just let my 8-year-old swim all alone while I took a nap? The kind who dates men that obviously hate children and for the trees, can't see the forest, I thought. But somehow I managed not to say it out loud. For exactly 6 months, Marcus had been in Sarah's life, and in that relatively short period of time, I'd watched Danny transform from a bubbly, outgoing, confident kid into something quiet and withdrawn and fearful. For the first time since his parents' divorce 3 years earlier, he'd started having nightmares again. At age 8, he'd begun wetting the bed after being completely potty trained since he was 3. Most telling and heartbreaking of all, whenever Marcus was around, he'd started clinging to Sarah, like a baby monkey afraid of being left in the jungle. My concerns with Sarah, I tried to bring up multiple times over the past few months, but so desperately lonely and emotionally fragile she was after her messy divorce from Danny's father, that to see any red flags waving in hurricane force winds, she refused. Undeniably handsome, Marcus was 6 feet 2 inches with thick dark hair, and the kind of dangerous predatory smile that made otherwise intelligent women do things that were catastrophically stupid. Charm he had when he wanted to use it, which was usually only when Sarah was around, and never ever when it was just Danny and him alone. From the ICU 3 hours later, the pediatric doctor emerged, looking grim and exhausted. Dr. Martinez was a small woman in her 50s, with kind eyes that sat behind wire-rimmed glasses. Stable, Danny was, but remained in the medically induced coma to prevent any dangerous brain swelling. A significant amount of water was still in his lungs despite the emergency room's very aggressive treatment. Most concerning of all, on his shoulders, upper arms, and the back of his neck, there was visible bruising. Bruising? I asked sharply. My nursing training from community college kicking in automatically. Could be from the rescue efforts, Dr. Martinez said very carefully. In that diplomatic way doctors speak when they suspect something. Sinister, but legally can't prove it. Sometimes considerable force has to be used by the lifeguards and paramedics to extract someone from water and perform emergency CPR. Completely white Sarah's face went, like someone had drained every single drop of blood out of her body. The back of a waiting room chair she gripped so hard that her knuckles turned the same ghostly color as her face. "Can we see him now?" she whispered through her trembling lips. Down a sterile hallway we followed Dr. Martinez, a hallway lined with cheerful motivational posters that featured cartoon animals and felt grotesquely inappropriate, given the circumstances. Impossibly small and fragile Danny looked in the hospital bed, completely dwarfed by the forest of machines that beeped and hummed and to life kept him tethered. Into his nose and mouth, tubes snaked like some kind of medical octopus, and his skin had a grayish pallor that made him look almost like a ghost. Still faintly blue around the edges were his lips, and those bruises on his shoulders stood out like dark purple flowers against his pale skin. Closely, I studied them with my trained eye, drawing on all I had learned during my brief nursing career. These were not the kind of bruises you would get from a legitimate rescue operation. They were too specific, too purposeful, and too perfectly symmetrical. Exactly like what you would see if someone had grabbed an 8-year-old by his shoulders and underwater held him while he struggled and fought for his life. "Sarah," I said quietly, keeping my voice controlled and level. "Those bruises look like someone grabbed him hard and held him down. The lifeguards had to. Under the arms or around the chest, the lifeguards would have grabbed him for rescue breathing and CPR. These marks are on his shoulders and the back of his neck, like from above someone pushed him down and held him there while he tried to surface." Shallow and rapid Sarah's breathing became, like she was having a panic attack. Toward the door she kept glancing, as if she expected someone to walk in and contradict all that I was saying, or maybe for something, arrest her. "I need some air," she said, practically running out of the room like the building itself was on fire. With Danny I stayed for another 2 hours, holding his small cold hand and promising him over and over that safe he was now, that Aunt Lisa was here and never again was anyone going to hurt him. Whatever at Clearwater Lake had happened, the truth I was going to find out, and I was going to make sure that whoever was responsible would pay the price. That night, after Sarah had gone home to shower and change clothes and pretend like everything was normal, the 30-minute route to Clearwater Lake I drove. The park at sunset officially closed, but the back entrance I knew from our teenage years when Sarah and I would sneak in for midnight swimming parties with our high school friends. For something this dark and terrible to have happened here, the place held too many good memories. Near the old maintenance shed that hadn't been used in years I parked, and the winding gravel path to the main swimming area I walked. Nearly full the August moon was, casting everything in a silver light that made the perfectly still lake look like it was a mirror reflecting another world. During the day, this place would be crowded with families, with children laughing and splashing, the air filled with the smell of sunscreen and barbecue grills. Now, haunted and wrong it felt. That's when I spotted them, scattered near the picnic table that was closest to the water. Lying in the sand like evidence from a crime scene were Marcus's cigarette butts. Marlboro Reds, the same brand I had seen him smoking countless times in Sarah's driveway over the past 6 months. But fresh these were, probably from yesterday, and several of them had bright red lipstick stains that were definitely not Sarah's shade. Soft pinks and corals she always wore, that complemented her fair complexion. Deep crimson, these were almost burgundy, like dried blood under the moonlight. I crouched down and more carefully examined them. At least 6 cigarettes, all of them smoked down to the filter. At least an hour of chain smoking that represented, maybe more. For a significant amount of time, someone had been here, waiting or watching or planning something terrible. The timeline in my head I checked. Marcus had claimed he left the lake before Danny's accident, all because of a work emergency that required his immediate attention. But if that were true, why were there fresh cigarettes from yesterday here? And whose lipstick was on them? Nothing but chapstick Sarah had been wearing when at the hospital I arrived. With my phone, I took detailed photos from multiple angles, then I continued searching the immediate area near the water's edge, partially buried in the coarse sand, something I found that made my blood turn to ice water. Danny's swimming goggles, the special prescription ones with the cartoon shark design that without them he never ever went swimming. Too nearsighted he was to see clearly underwater without them. And over $200 Sarah had paid to have his exact prescription put into the special lenses. Why would Danny voluntarily take his goggles off? He was practically blind underwater without them, unable to navigate or orient himself properly. A security blanket, those goggles were like. They never left his face when he was swimming, not even in our own backyard pool where every inch by heart he knew, unless someone had pulled them off deliberately. Someone who wanted to disorient him, make him panic and get confused, make him easier to control and easier to overpower. Carefully, I bagged both the goggles and several of the cigarette butts, using tissues I found in my purse, then drove home with a sick, heavy feeling settling in my stomach like it was lead poisoning. Much more I needed to know about Marcus's actual whereabouts yesterday. So I decided to do some investigating that probably wasn't entirely legal, but for Danny's safety was definitely necessary. The next morning, Pizza Hut I called, where Marcus supposedly worked his management position. "Hi, this is Marcus Kellerman's girlfriend," I lied smoothly, using the fake sweet voice I had perfected during my years working customer service jobs. "He left his wallet at my place yesterday, and I wanted to drop it off for him at work. What time does his shift start today?" "Marcus didn't work yesterday," the manager told me, by my question sounding genuinely confused. "He called Tuesday morning and said he had food poisoning and couldn't leave the bathroom. Since then, I haven't seen him, and on the schedule today he's not either." Pounding against my ribs, my heart started, like a trapped bird that was trying to escape. "Are you absolutely certain? He told me he had an emergency shift yesterday afternoon that he couldn't miss." "Nope, definitely not. A double shift on Tuesday the poor guy was supposed to work, but around 9 in the morning he called in sick. He said he was throwing up every 20 minutes and couldn't function." Politely I thanked him and hung up, my hands shaking as Sarah I immediately called. "We need to talk right now," I said. "Meet me at Rosie's Diner in 20 minutes. She agreed to meet me at the coffee shop downtown where countless hours we'd spent during high school, gossiping about boys and planning our futures that seemed so bright and so full of possibility. Now we were about to discuss whether her boyfriend had tried to murder her son in cold blood. Like she'd aged 10 years overnight, Sarah looked. Under her eyes, dark circles hung like bruises. Her unwashed hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail, secured with what looked to be a rubber band, and she was wearing the same wrinkled clothes she had on yesterday. Her hands she wrapped around her coffee cup like it was the single thing anchoring her to reality. "I know Marcus wasn't at work yesterday," I said without any preamble, watching her face for tells carefully. Out the window at the morning traffic, she stared for a long moment, watching cars full of normal people who were living normal lives. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely more than a whisper. "How do you know that?" "I called Pizza Hut and I spoke to his manager. Marcus called in sick Tuesday morning with what was supposed to be food poisoning. So, where was he really, Sarah? He told me he was going job hunting around town. His manager has been threatening to fire him for months because he keeps calling in sick or showing up late or leaving early. But at the lake he was when Danny almost died. I don't know where he was." Through her teeth she was lying, and both of us knew it. "Yes, you do." Forward I leaned across the sticky Formica table. I found his cigarette butts scattered all around the picnic area, Sarah. "Fresh ones. From yesterday, with bright red lipstick. That definitely is not yours." Sarah's carefully maintained composure finally cracked, like an eggshell hitting concrete. Down her cheeks tears started flowing, and her shoulders began to shake with sobs she barely suppressed. "I didn't know," she cried, her voice breaking. "I swear to God, Lisa, I didn't know that he was there watching us. But you suspected something was wrong." Miserably she nodded, wiping her nose on a paper napkin that disintegrated immediately. "Danny's been absolutely terrified of him lately. And yesterday morning, into this horrible, vicious fight they got." "What kind of fight? About what?" "Danny accidentally knocked over one of Marcus's beer bottles while he was eating his breakfast. It rolled off the kitchen table and on the tile floor it shattered. Absolutely ballistic Marcus went, screaming about disrespectful little brats who don't understand that actions have very serious consequences. Into fists, my hands clenched under the table. What exactly did he say to an 8-year-old? He said Danny was too comfortable, too spoiled, that what real fear felt like he'd never learned. He said maybe it was time for Danny to understand that actions have serious permanent consequences that undone they can't be. Into place, the pieces were clicking in my mind, like a horrifying jigsaw puzzle, and to my stomach I felt physically sick. Sarah, did Marcus suggest going to the lake yesterday? Everything I needed to know her face told me, before she even opened her mouth to speak. He said Danny had been acting bratty and disrespectful all week, and needed to burn off some energy before he got completely out of control. He thought maybe if we took him swimming, got him really tired, for the rest of the day he'd behave better and stop being such a problem child. And then he mysteriously had to leave for a work emergency. He got a phone call right after we arrived at the lake. He said it was his manager, that someone had called in sick with the flu and he needed to cover an emergency shift immediately or he would lose his job. But the truth I knew now, this entire thing Marcus had orchestrated, like a chess master. The lake trip he'd suggested specifically, then pretended to leave for work so he could circle back and find Danny alone and vulnerable in the water. The lipstick on the cigarettes meant he hadn't been alone either. Someone with him he had brought to watch or help, or just witness what he was planning to do to a helpless child. Sarah, I think Marcus deliberately tried to murder Danny. Violently, she shook her head, like the words I was saying she could physically reject. No, absolutely not. He's not perfect, I know that, but a child he would never hurt. You're being paranoid and everywhere you are seeing conspiracies. Then explain the bruises that look exactly like finger marks. Explain why Danny's prescription goggles were lying abandoned on the shore when in water he never takes them off. Explain why Marcus lied about work. Explain why he was chain smoking at the lake with some woman who wears dark lipstick. Sarah's sobbing intensified until breathe properly she could barely. Between gasps for air, she managed to say, "There's something else I didn't tell you." To liquid nitrogen my blood turned. What? Last week, on my computer, I caught Marcus looking up Danny's life insurance policy, the one Tom set up during our divorce proceedings as part of the custody agreement. When I asked him why he was researching it, he said he was just curious about our family's financial situation, trying to understand our long-term security and planning. Like I might actually vomit right there in the diner booth, I felt. How much is the policy worth? $200,000. In the air between us, the number hung, like a death sentence written in neon lights. Sarah, you have to go to the police immediately. With what evidence? Some cigarette butts and a computer search? They'll say it's all circumstantial. Marcus is charming and manipulative. He will convince them I'm just a hysterical single mother looking for someone to blame for what was a tragic accident. Probably right, she was. But let this go, I couldn't. If Marcus had tried once and failed, he would try again. Absolutely. And next time, Danny might not be so lucky to survive. There's another way, I said slowly, the plan forming in my mind as I spoke. We need to get him to confess on tape. Over the next 2 hours, what was probably an illegal and definitely dangerous plan we developed. Sarah would invite Marcus over for dinner that evening, tell him she was feeling completely overwhelmed by the hospital situation and his emotional support she desperately needed. While he was there, somewhere, in the house, I would hide with my phone recording everything. Carefully, Sarah would bring up Danny's accident and try to get Marcus talking about what really happened. What if he gets suspicious and realizes what we're doing? Sarah asked, her voice shaking with terror. Then we run like hell and immediately call 911. But we have to try this, Sarah. It might be our only chance to get the truth and to protect Danny. That evening, while Danny remained unconscious in the pediatric ICU, fighting for his life, our dangerous plan we put into action. At Sarah's small ranch house I arrived early, and in her bedroom closet I positioned myself, with my phone fully charged and set to record video. A reasonably clear view of the living room I had through the slightly cracked closet door. Precisely at 6 Marcus arrived, bringing takeout Chinese food from Golden Dragon restaurant and a bottle of cheap red wine from the gas station. Relaxed he seemed, almost cheerful, whistling softly under his breath, which made my skin crawl as if I was covered in poisonous spiders. This was absolutely not the behavior of someone whose girlfriend's child was fighting for his life. "How's our little swimmer doing tonight?" he asked casually, not even trying to sound genuinely concerned about Danny's condition. "Exactly the same," Sarah replied, her voice carefully controlled and neutral. "The doctors say it could be weeks or even months before we know if there's any permanent brain damage or cognitive impairment." Sympathetically, Marcus nodded and started unpacking the greasy takeout containers. Kids are incredibly resilient, though, especially tough little guys like Danny. He'll probably bounce back completely and be swimming competitively again before you even know it. The casual, almost dismissive way he said it made me want to burst out of that closet and with my bare hands, strangle him. Wine for both of them, Sarah poured, her hands shaking slightly, but not enough for him to have noticed. I keep replaying yesterday over and over again in my mind, trying to remember every single detail of what happened. Why torture yourself like that? Freak accidents happen all the time, especially around water. There is absolutely nothing you could have done differently to have prevented it, but that's exactly what I can't stop thinking about. Whether it really was just a random accident. Marcus paused with a fork full of lo mein halfway to his mouth, suddenly very still. What do you mean by that exactly? Those bruises on Danny's shoulders and neck. Dr. Martinez said they looked like grip marks, like someone had grabbed him really hard and held him. My breath I held, watching Marcus's face through the crack in the closet door. For just a split second, his carefully maintained mask of concern slipped completely, and something cold and calculating I saw flash in his dark eyes. Suspicious things doctors see everywhere these days, he said finally, his tone slightly sharper than before. They're probably just trying to cover their own legal liability in case you decide to sue the lake or the lifeguard company for negligence. Maybe you're right, Sarah said, playing her part absolutely perfectly. But I also found out that you weren't actually at work yesterday when you said you were. His fork Marcus set down very slowly and deliberately. 10 degrees the temperature in the room seemed to drop, and the dangerous shift in his energy I could feel, even from my hiding place. Who told you that? Does it really matter? You lied to me, Marcus. My son nearly died yesterday, and you lied about where you were during the most terrifying moment of my entire life. I was looking for work, driving around to different restaurants and businesses and submitting applications. I didn't want to worry you about how desperate our financial situation really is. For 6 hours, all afternoon, and somehow you ended up at Clearwater Lake? Abruptly, Marcus stood up, his 6 feet 2 inches frame suddenly seeming to tower over Sarah in a way that felt unmistakably threatening. Every muscle in my body I tensed, ready to burst out of the closet if any kind of aggressive move toward her he made. You're being completely paranoid and irrational, he said. But all its earlier casual warmth his voice had lost. Grief and stress are making you see conspiracies and plots where there are none. Then explain this, Sarah said, pulling out the photo of the cigarette butts I'd taken. Explain why your Marlboro Reds were scattered all around the picnic table by the lake if you left before Danny's accident even happened. The silence that followed stretched between them like a wire that was about to snap. My own heartbeat thundering in my ears I could hear. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was completely different. Cold, empty, and absolutely terrifying. You really want to know what happened yesterday? Sarah nodded, though her entire body I could see trembling with fear. Slowly, Marcus sat back down, and a cruel smile spread across his face like it was spilled oil. Your precious little Danny was never any real danger of dying. I just wanted to teach him a lesson about showing proper respect to the adults who are trying to help raise him. So hard against my ribs, my heart was hammering that I was afraid he might actually hear it. I made absolutely sure my phone was capturing every single word of his confession. I waited until you went to the bathroom. Then I quietly swam out to where he was playing with those ridiculous goggles. So absorbed in his stupid underwater games the kid was that he didn't even notice me approaching him from behind. Completely pale, Sarah's face had gone, but somehow she managed to keep him talking. What exactly did you do to him? I grabbed him by the shoulders and under the water I pushed him down, just for a few seconds initially, long enough to scare him properly, to make him understand that there are real consequences when you disrespect someone who is trying to be a father figure. A few seconds? Sarah's voice cracked with horror. He was unconscious when they pulled him out. He nearly died, Marcus. That part wasn't supposed to happen the way that it did. For the first time, slightly uncertain Marcus looked, almost confused by his own actions. He started thrashing around much more violently than I had expected, fighting me like some kind of wild animal. Longer than I originally planned, I had to hold him down to get him to stop struggling and to learn his lesson. My vision tunneled with pure, murderous rage. This absolute monster had held an 8-year-old child underwater until he lost consciousness, then calmly watched as he nearly died, while feeling no remorse whatsoever. So, you just left him there to drown? I swam back to shore, and in the woods I hid to watch what would happen next. I figured when you came back from the bathroom and found him floating face down, it would look like a completely tragic accident. And perfectly it worked, didn't it? At least until you started asking too many questions and getting suspicious. Slowly, Sarah stood up, backing toward the bedroom where I was hidden. I need to call the police right now, much faster than she was. Marcus was. He grabbed her wrist hard enough that his fingers digging into her pale skin I could see, definitely leaving behind finger-shaped bruises. I don't think that's a good idea at all. See, if you call the police, I'll tell them all about how you've been physically abusing Danny for months. All those mysterious bruises and marks I've noticed on him, I'll say every single one of them you put there. And who do you think they'll believe? A concerned stepfather figure trying to protect an innocent child? Or a struggling single mother with a documented history of depression and severe anxiety? That's when out of the closet I burst like an avenging angel. Phone still recording, pure fury coursing through my veins like molten lava. They'll believe this crystal clear recording of you confessing to attempted murder, you psychopathic piece of human garbage. Toward me, Marcus spun around, his face contorting with shock and murderous rage. For my phone he lunged, but completely ready for him I was. To Sarah I threw it, who caught it perfectly, and with shaking but determined fingers immediately started dialing 911. By the throat Marcus grabbed me, his fingers pressing into my windpipe hard enough to complete completely cut off my supply of air. But self-defense classes I'd been taking religiously twice a week since my own divorce 2 years ago. And for exactly this scenario, I was ready. My knee I brought up hard into his groin with all the force I could muster. And when in excruciating pain he doubled over, the heavy ceramic lamp from Sarah's dresser I grabbed, and on the back of his head I brought it down with everything I had. To the hardwood floor he crumpled like a broken marionette. Immediately blood began to seep from a deep gash in his scalp and around his unconscious head to pool. "Police and ambulance are on their way," Sarah said, her voice shaking but filled with a newfound determination and strength. Over Marcus's unconscious form we stood, both of us breathing hard and probably in a state of clinical shock. After what felt like several hours but was probably only 10 or 15 minutes, multiple sirens we heard approaching from different directions. A complete blur the next few hours were of police statements, paramedics checking my throat for damage, crime scene photographers, and endless paperwork that seemed to multiply exponentially. Consciousness Marcus regained just as they were loading him into the ambulance. Immediately a lawyer he demanded and claimed that we had attacked him completely unprovoked and for no reason. But crystal clear the recording was, and more than enough evidence to ensure for a very long time he would be going away. He was formally arrested for attempted murder in the first degree, aggravated assault on a minor, child endangerment, witness intimidation, and several other felony charges that through my exhaustion and adrenaline crash I couldn't keep track of. 3 days later, Danny woke up. His first words were, "Where's Marcus? Is he coming back to hurt me again?" "Gone forever," I told him, stroking his hair while with overwhelming relief Sarah cried. "He's never, ever coming back, sweetheart. You're completely safe now." Slow Danny's recovery was, but ultimately complete. The doctor said there was no permanent brain damage or cognitive impairment, though what happened at the lake that day he had absolutely no memory of. Together, Sarah and I decided that it was probably better that way. That trauma with him for the rest of his life he didn't need to carry. A complete emotional breakdown Sarah had once the adrenaline finally wore off completely. Apologizing she couldn't stop. For bringing a dangerous predator into their lives she couldn't forgive herself. How she'd missed all the obvious warning signs that so clear seemed in retrospect, she couldn't understand. Months of intensive therapy it took for her to begin understanding that a skilled, practiced manipulator Marcus had been, who had fooled everyone, not just her. During the trial 8 months later, much more we learned about Marcus's deeply disturbing history. For child abuse, he had been investigated twice before in different states, but never formally charged due to insufficient evidence and some clever legal maneuvering. From 2 previous girlfriends who'd had young children, there were restraining orders. A clear, well-documented pattern he had of targeting vulnerable single mothers, worming his way into their lives with charm and fake concern, then systematically taking out his rage and control issues on their helpless children. The prosecutor called him a predator who specifically sought out vulnerable families to exploit and terrorize for his own twisted satisfaction. Danny wasn't his first victim, just his first attempted murder that anyone knew about. To 25 years in state prison, Marcus was ultimately sentenced, without the possibility of parole. As the bailiff led him away in shackles and an orange jumpsuit, directly at me he looked and clearly mouthed the words, "This isn't over between us." But it was over. Finally and completely over. Swimming again Danny started 10 months later, though now he only swam in public pools with certified lifeguards and never ever alone. An excellent trauma therapist Sarah found, and slowly, carefully began dating again. This time with extensive background checks, long courtships, and my complete approval of anyone who wanted to be around Danny and me. My downtown apartment I sold and moved into the house directly next door to Sarah and Danny, becoming the fiercely protective aunt that Danny had always deserved but never truly had. I learned that sometimes family means stepping up when the adults have failed. It means trusting your instincts even when everyone tells you you're just being paranoid. It means being willing to commit felony assault to protect the people you love the most in this world. 2 years later, the regional championship in butterfly stroke for his age group, Danny won. At the victory ceremony, onto the first-place podium he climbed with his gold medal, and directly at Sarah and me he pointed in the crowded bleachers full of cheering parents. "I want to thank my mom and my Aunt Lisa," he announced into the microphone, his voice clear and strong and confident. "They saved my life when someone tried to kill me." Most people in the audience probably thought he was just being dramatic, the way kids sometimes are when attention they want, but exactly what he meant, Sarah and I knew. Some rescues happen in hospital emergency rooms with medical teams and life support machines that work around the clock. Other rescues happen in living rooms with hidden recording devices, careful planning, and the courage to act when on the line absolutely everything is. The nightmare was finally over, but more importantly, safe and whole and swimming again, Danny was. And I'd learned that sometimes the most dangerous people in the world are the ones we voluntarily invite right into our homes, the ones we trust with our most precious treasures, the ones who smile at us while secretly planning horrors that are unspeakable. Never again, not on my watch, not ever.